We're continuing our study. I have this document somewhere over here. Yep, there we go. I have this document, Ezekiel's response to the culture war of his day, an excerpt from Commentary on Ezekiel by Frank Chesser. He has 10 points that they bring out from this excerpt regarding Ezekiel's response to, I guess, what they would call the culture war. There's always a culture war going on. It never abates. It's the same war that the devil has been raging against God and God's people for time immemorial, really. God says to do this, to stay away from that. The devil says, don't do that, and to embrace the things that God says to avoid. And so you're always going to have this clash of good versus evil. But we can learn how to deal with it better by looking at some good biblical examples. And again, the particular chapter that they pull this out of is Ezekiel 16, which is very frank discussion, a very frank, what do they call it today? Blasting. It's where, Ezekiel blasts the nation of Israel. That's what it put that into modern parlance, the bombshells, the whatever you want to call it. But these are the things that Ezekiel says that God was very displeased with them over. We don't need to necessarily go into great detail about the first. I think we had made it up to point 7, maybe. Talked about the fact that we can only know what God wants for us. To know what sin is through divine revelation. Covetousness is idolatry. That was the second point. The third point was that Israel had misread God's love, grace, and goodness. God takes care of us. He provides for us, but some people mistake that for approval. God is very gracious toward us, but He does cause the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. I believe maybe I'm badly paraphrasing that, but that doesn't mean that what we are doing is right just because we feel like it's right and we think, we're getting ahead, monetarily. We may be very much falling behind spiritually. Fourth, misplaced trust leads to spiritual ruin, so we have to be cautious about where we put our faith and our trust. Fifth, Israel abused the blessings on loan from God. God loans us things. He provides things for us to tend to take care of. The world itself, the physical world, we abuse that often. We have the honor of taking care of children that God gives to us, but we abuse that, unfortunately, a lot these days. Sixth, idolatry and sexual sins are twin sins. So idolatry and sins of a sexual nature are very much related. And then we'd gotten to this. I don't think we quite finished it. I think we got to the seventh was memory failures beget ingratitude that often ends in spiritual death. So talking about being ungrateful for things, not having the correct attitude of gratitude. Attitude. Sorry, I didn't mean to rhyme. We got to the point, I think, of David looking upon Bathsheba bathing. You remember that point? We kind of got a little wrapped up in that part of the conversation. Basically, the point being that we don't sometimes appreciate the things that God gives us. Instead, we want other things. We want more things. I mean, it's especially problematic here in the United States, I think, where we have just anything and everything, unfortunately, given to us. I think that is by design. Instead of, working hard and earning a living and, seeing God's providence directly, instead of that, the government gives people money. They steal from productive people and they give to people that aren't producing. And so who are they grateful to? Well, they're grateful to the government politicians that give them that money. So I think that's, again, very much by design, but it's very easy for us who have so much to take it for granted and then to want more. The last part of this, I don't think we quite got to. He talks about, after that, 1 Kings 10 and 1 Kings 11. He says, remembering and thanking God continually for the blessings of 1 Kings 10 would have saved Solomon from the evils and consequences of 1 Kings 11. So let's talk about that for just a moment. So just as a reminder, unless somebody wants to pontificate about it off the top of their head, let's look back at 1 Kings 10. And we won't read the whole thing, but we'll kind of zip through. This is when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord. She came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices and much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind, and Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. And so when the Queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, and the attendance of his servants, their clothing, cupbearers, burnt offerings that he offered at the house of the Lord, there was no more breath in her. She said to the king, the report was true that I heard in my own land of your words and of your wisdom, but I did not believe the reports until I came and my own eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told to me. Your wisdom and prosperity surpassed the report that I heard. Happy are your men, happy are your servants, who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, he has made you king, that you may execute justice and righteousness. And then she gave the king 120 talents of gold and a very great quantity of spices and precious stones. Never again came such an abundance of spices as these that the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Okay, so that's basically a good handling of what chapter 10 is about, right? So it basically talks about the prosperity of Solomon, all the great things that were going on there. And then if you go down to chapter 11, now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Okay, well, there we see the beginning of some problems, right? Along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn your heart away after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives. How is that even possible? I mean, seriously. I guess you get some quality time with them like once every other day. I mean, 700, that's, 2 years worth of wives.
We have to throw in the 300 concubines.
And the 300 concubines. So, on top of the wives, he's cheating with the concubines. So, anyway, it's just horrific. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing, and I don't mean to make light of it. It's so hard to grasp. You can't really even understand some kind of a ridiculous. I mean, you look at today and think about this. I mean, you would think that that's almost like some of these woke characters today, where they have 3 people in a quote unquote marriage, like that. How does that work? It doesn't work. It can't work. It's like a commune. Okay. Well, anyway, I don't mean to get sidetracked on that, but he says, 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart, for when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives who made offerings and sacrificed to their God. I mean, just imagine, it must have been littered with all of these idol gods, with all those wives and concubines. So, in any case, the Lord was angry with Solomon, verse 9, because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you, and will give it to your servant. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. So, basically, and you can read the rest of that, and you can see all the bad things that happened as a result of that, of him, losing God's favor. So you can see what ingratitude, and I mean, all of the things that Solomon had, all of these blessings, and he threw it away for, following after, or at least humoring, I guess, his wives, all these foreign wives. And then the last thing he mentioned, whoever took this excerpt and embellished it, talks about Jehoiada, I think that's right, a priest. It says, in conjunction with his wife, Jehoiada saved, protected, preserved, and aided Joash in becoming king and ruling over Judah until he died. At Jehoiada's death, Joash forsook God, embraced idolatry, rejected the preaching and warnings of the prophets, and had Jehoiada's son Zechariah stoned to death for rebuking him. And then it's such an interesting reading. I don't want to go through it's several chapters, but I will kind of do like we just did. We'll kind of skip around, but I'm going to be reading from 2 Chronicles. I guess I'm going to start in chapter 22. So it says here that the inhabitants of Jerusalem made Ahaziah, his youngest son, king in his place, for the band of men that came with the Arabians to the camp had killed all the older sons. So Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, reigned. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. Now this is the character we want to focus a little more on. His mother's name was Athaliah. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Athaliah, the granddaughter of Omri. He also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother was his counselor in doing wickedly. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, as the house of Ahab had done. For after the death of his father they were his counselors to his undoing. He even followed their counsel and went with Jehoram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, to make war against Hazael, king of Syria, at Ramoth Gilead. And the Syrians wounded Joram, and he returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds that he had received at Ramah. And when he fought against Hazael, king of Syria, and Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to see Joram, the son of Ahab, in Jezreel, because he was wounded. But it was ordained by God that the downfall of Ahaziah should come about through his going to visit Joram. For when he went there, he went out with Jehoram to meet Jehu, the son of Nimshi, whom the Lord had anointed to destroy the house of Ahab. And when Jehu was executing judgment on the house of Ahab, he met the princes of Judah and the sons of Ahaziah's brothers who attended Ahaziah, and he killed them. He searched for Ahaziah, and he was captured while hiding in Samaria, and he was brought to Jehu and put to death. They buried him, for they said, "He is the grandson of Jehoshaphat, who sought the Lord with all his heart," and the house of Ahaziah had no one able to rule the kingdom. Now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal family of the house of Judah. This really sounds... I've never watched Game of Thrones, but this sounds like the kind of thing that maybe would happen on, these kind of shows. So she destroys all the royal family of the house of Judah. But Jehoshabeath, the daughter of the king, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were about to be put to death, and she put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Thus Jehoshabeath, the daughter of King Jehoram, and wife of Jehoiada the priest, because she was a sister of Ahaziah, hid him from Athaliah, so that she did not put him to death. And he remained with them 6 years, hidden in the house of God, while Athaliah reigned over the land. But in the 7th year, Jehoiada, took courage and entered into a covenant with the commanders of hundreds, Azariah the son of Jeroam, Ishmael the son of I'm just bad at these names, I'm sorry. Anyway, so he enters into this agreement, with all these different leaders. And they went about through Judah and gathered the Levites from all the cities of Judah and the heads of fathers' houses of Israel, and they came to Jerusalem, and all the assembly made a covenant with the king in the house of God. And Jehoiada said to them, "Behold, the king's son, let him reign." So they were planning a coup here, as the Lord spoke concerning the sons of David. "This is the thing that you shall do. Of you priests and Levites who come off duty on the Sabbath, 1/3 shall be gatekeepers, 1/3 shall be at the king's house, and 1/3 at the gate of the foundation. And all the people shall be in the courts of the house of the Lord. Let no one enter the house of the Lord except the priests and ministering Levites. They may enter, for they are holy, but all the people shall keep the charge of the Lord. The Levites shall surround the king, each with his weapons in his hand, and whoever enters the house shall be put to death. Be with the king when he comes in and when he goes out." So it sounds like they're protecting this king that they're about to make the coup. Is that what do you call it when you overthrow a king? Is that a coup? Or is that the right word for it, or is that just when you're overthrowing a government? Well, anyway, they're about to try and overthrow the ruling person, which would be Athaliah. So he says, "The Levites and all Judah did according to all that Jehoiada the priest commanded, and they each brought his men who were to go off duty on the Sabbath with those who were to come on duty on the Sabbath. For Jehoiada the priest did not dismiss the divisions. And Jehoiada the priest gave to the captains the spears and the large and small shields that had been King David's, which were in the house of God. And he set all the people as a guard for the king, every man with his weapon in his hand, from the south side of the house to the north side of the house, around the altar and the house." They're laying a trap, I suppose, if you will. Then they brought out the king's son and put the crown on him and gave him the testimony, and they proclaimed him king, and Jehoiada and his sons anointed him, and they said, Long live the king. When Athaliah, I guess, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, when she heard the noise of the people running and praising the king, she went into the house of the Lord to the people. And when she looked, there was the king standing by his pillar at the entrance, and the captains and the trumpeters beside the king, and all the people of the land rejoicing, blowing trumpets, and the singers with the musical instruments leading in the celebration. And Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, Treason! Treason! Then Jehoiada the priest brought out the captains who were set over the army, saying to them, Bring her out between the ranks, and anyone who follows her is to be put to death with the sword. For the priest said, Do not put her to death in the house of the Lord. So they laid hands on her. She went into the entrance of the horse gate of the king's house, and they put her to death there. And Jehoiada made a covenant between himself and all the people and the king that they should be the Lord's people. Then all the people went to the house of Baal, tore it down. His altars and his images they broke in pieces. They killed Matan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. And Jehoiada posted watchmen for the house of the Lord under the direction of the Levitical priests and the Levites, whom David had organized to be in charge of the house of the Lord, to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, as it is written in the law of Moses, with rejoicing and singing according to the order of David. He stationed the gatekeepers at the gates of the house of the Lord, so that no one should enter who is in any way unclean. He took the captains, the nobles, the governors of the people, and the people of the land, and they brought the king down from the house of the Lord, marching through the upper gate to the king's house, and they set the king on the royal throne. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet after Athaliah had been put to death with the sword. So it sounds like they become almost like a theocracy. You know, they're trying to get rid of the Baal and these false god and the trappings that went along with it. So here's the meat of the point here. I just thought that was interesting, and we're saying all of that as the background for this part. So Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. So this is who all the fuss was over. He reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. And Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. Jehoiada got for him 2 wives, and he had sons and daughters. After this, Joash decided to restore the house of the Lord. He gathered the priests and the Levites and said to them, Go out to the cities of Judah and gather from all Israel money to repair the house of your God from year to year, and see that you act quickly. But the Levites did not act quickly, so the king summoned Jehoiada, the chief, and said to him, Why have you not required the Levites to bring in from Judah and Jerusalem the tax levied by Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the congregation of Israel for the tent of testimony? For the sons of Athaliah, that wicked woman, had broken into the house of God and had used all the dedicated things of the house of the Lord for the Baals. So the king commanded, they made a chest and set it outside the gate of the house of the Lord, and the proclamation was made throughout Judah and Jerusalem to bring in for the Lord the tax that Moses, the servant of God, laid on Israel in the wilderness. And all the princes and the people rejoiced, and they brought their tax and dropped it into the chest until they had finished. And whenever the chest was brought to the king's officers by the Levites, when they saw there was much money in it, the king's secretary and the officer of the chief priest would come and empty the chest and take it and return it to its place. Thus they did day after day and collected money in abundance. And they gave it to those who had charge of the work of the house of the Lord, and they hired masons and carpenters to restore the house of the Lord, and also workers in iron and bronze to repair the house of the Lord. So those who were engaged in the work labored, and the repairing went forward in their hands, and they restored the house of God to its proper condition and strengthened it. And when they had finished, they brought the rest of the money before the king and Jehoiada, and with it were made utensils for the house of the Lord, both for the service and the burnt offerings, and dishes for incense, and vessels of gold and silver. And they offered burnt offerings in the house of the Lord regularly all the days of Jehoiada. But Jehoiada grew old and full of days and died. He was 130 years old at his death. They buried him in the city of David among the kings, because he had done good in Israel and toward God and his house. Now, after the death of Jehoiada, the princes of Judah came and paid homage to the king. Then the king listened to them, And they abandoned the house of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and served the Asherim and the idols. And wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this guilt of theirs. Yet he sent prophets among them to bring them back to the Lord. These testified against them, but they would not pay attention. Isn't that sad? I mean, you have all this effort that goes towards this, and then when this one man dies, who apparently was the one that was really leading the charge, leading pretty much everything, when that one person died, that was it. You know? I guess it also goes to the question of, how dedicated were the people? I mean, they didn't continue on with this. Or maybe the king had so much influence. But anyway, so here we go to Joash's treachery, and this is the point at which we are talking now. I'll go ahead and throw this up on the screen. Then the Spirit of God clothed Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest, and he stood above the people and said to them, Thus says God, why do you break the commandments of the Lord, so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you. But they conspired against him, and by command of the king, they stoned him with stones in the court of the house of the Lord. Thus Joash the king did not remember the kindness that Jehoiada, Zechariah's father, had shown him, but killed his son. And when he was dying, he said, May the Lord see and avenge. Sad. So here we are in verse 23. This is verses 23 through 25. At the end of the year, the army of the Syrians came up against Joash. They came to Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed all the princes of the people from among the people and sent all their spoil to the king of Damascus. Though the army of the Syrians had come with few men, the Lord delivered into their hand a very great army because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. Thus they executed judgment on Joash. When they had departed from him, leaving him severely wounded, his servants conspired against him because of the blood of the son of Jehoiada the priest, and killed him on his bed. So he died, and they buried him in the city of David, but they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. So again, there's just so much that we can learn from these. Sometimes there's good examples, and sometimes there's bad examples. All right, so that was the ending, he says, of point 7 here. At Jehoiada's death, Joash forsook God, embraced idolatry, rejected the preaching and warnings of the prophets, and had Jehoiada's son Zechariah stoned to death for rebuking him. Inspiration's report of this tragedy reads, Thus Joash the king remembered not the kindness which Jehoiada his father had done, but slew his son. Memory failures and ingratitude accompany every continuous sin and sin of rebellion. Point number 8. The desires of the flesh are insatiable. Wow. That right there. Again, all these points, but this one in particular, seem like they are very emblematic of the kinds of things we see today in our world. The desires of the flesh are insatiable. It seems like it. There's never enough. You can never have enough of this carnality or that carnality. Verses 28 through 34 are the ones that are referenced. So let's read Ezekiel 16. We'll have to break this up into a couple of chunks. Where it reads, Thou hast played the whore also with the Assyrians, because thou wast unsatiable. Yea, thou hast played the harlot with them, and yet couldst not be satisfied. Thou hast moreover multiplied thy fornication in the land of Canaan unto Chaldea, and yet thou wast not satisfied wherewith. How weak is thine heart, saith the Lord God. seeing thou doest all these things, the work of an imperious, whorish woman.
There's an add turn of words in turn of phrase.
Yeah. In that thou buildest thine eminent place in the head of every way, and makest thine high place in every street, and hast not been as an harlot, and that thou scornest hire. That was the point that Philip. And again, that's a polite way of saying you're not doing it for money, and you're not. You're not paying. But as a wife that committeth adultery, which taketh strangers instead of her husband, that they give gifts to all whores, but thou givest thy gifts to all thy lovers, and hirest them, that they may come unto thee on every side for thy whoredom. So you're not just whoring yourself out. You're paying other people to play the whore. I hate using that word, but I mean here it is. It's biblical, and the kids aren't in here, so. Hopefully they're not listening online, but it is true, and it is a biblical term. So, and the contrary is in thee from other women in thy whoredoms, whereas none followeth thee to commit whoredoms, and in that thou givest a reward, and no reward is given unto thee, therefore thou art contrary. So you're not just like a regular run-of-the-mill harlot, if you will. Very, very, very stark, frank, blunt talk here. Israel pursued political alliances with the heathen nations and claimed their gods as their own. Pagan nations were jealous and protective of their own gods, but Israel's love affair with idols was indiscriminate. Multiplying gods meant multiplying opportunities for the flesh. When Syria was defeated by Israel, instead of forsaking their gods, the Syrians chose a different location for their conflict, declaring, this is 1 Kings 20, verse 23, declaring, their gods are gods of the hills, therefore they were stronger than we. But let us fight against them in the plain, and surely we shall be stronger than they. Conversely, when Assyria's military proved superior to Israel's, Ahaz said, 2 Chronicles 28, verse 23, Ahaz said, because the gods of the king of Syria helped them, therefore will I sacrifice to them that they may help me. But they were the ruin of him and all Israel. You know, it's like having a lucky rabbit's foot or something, I guess. Hey, they're winning a battle. It must be because they're sacrificing to this idol god. They're worshiping that god. I'll do that too. But of course, it's ruinous. When a man's life is void of God, it is void of reason. There is nothing rational about the flesh. There is nothing rational about the flesh. That's a good quote. I like that quote. What's that?
I was just reading the other day about the vein of Marxism in the modern world.
Mm-hmm.
And this author, I think it was Ludwig von Mises, had presented a bunch of lectures in San Francisco Public Library in the 1950s. Some stenographer took it all down. That's the book that's now out, published in Auburn, Alabama. And in that, he was talking about that very issue, or not exactly, but it reminds me of a very similar issue of what the Marxists call dialectical materialism. Without going into all that, basically, it's just a variety of materialistic determinism. In other words, all there is matter. So ideas are not real. They're not separate and apart from your physical, chemical side of your brain. It's your brain is all there is, and ideas are just secretions of the brain, as it were.
Yeah.
And therefore they're determined by all the circumstances around physical, material circumstances around the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So this would mean you, in his case, he emphasized the economics of the society you live in as the most important factor that controls how your brain works.
Mm-hmm.
So you can only think in one way, and you cannot help but think that way. Of course, that sounds awfully modern because it's actually postmodern. The postmodernists picked that up, and they really have pushed that about how everything you construct is all constructive. You construct a worldview based on the people group you're a part of.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're a white Northern European type, you can only think in a certain way, and you can't understand persons of other ethnic groups. You can't really communicate with them, nor can you sympathize, even though you think you can, with their plight historically, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, classic Marxism. But the reason I brought that up was he mentioned how Marxists understand, since it's impossible because of the fact our brains are determined to think only certain ideas given our economic status, the class we're in.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot reason somebody out of that class and into the communist class or otherwise. There's only one solution. You have to kill them. There's no such thing as dialogue it's just by definition. Now we smirk at that and laugh at that, but it makes all the sense in the world given their beginning premises, given their point of view, that there is no way. See, when we talk about rationality, we assume that other men are equal in that I can present an argument to you, and if I have the truth and I have the proper evidence, and you're an honest person, you can hear it. You might resist it at first, but eventually you will think, wait a minute, that makes sense, and you'll be persuaded, and you'll change. And you may change me in the process. So it's give and take. That's the nature, true scholarship, science, and all that. But not according to Marxism. It can't happen that way. By definition, there's no persuading others because you cannot get them out of those material circumstances that they're surrounded by from birth. Mm-hmm. The only way to make changes then is through force, mm-hmm. through violence. And you have to silence your opponents because when they speak, of course, Ludwig von Mises' book, the whole thesis has to do with all the contradictions of Marxism. First of all, Karl Marx himself was of a bourgeois family. Uh-huh. His father was a very wealthy man. He himself, and Engels, Friedrich Engels, his cohort, they were all from wealthy, just extreme fabulous. Well, not Marx. He was a squanderer, but his friend was. He had all kinds of money. So I'm just saying they were extremely inconsistent, and yet when they applied their communist point of view, their Marxist point of view, which is all the rage today, of course, in our society, they would say, you can't sit down and have dialogue. You go to Fox News and you hear these talking heads on there. They're living 20 years ago. I mean, I love these people and respect them, but they just don't understand what has happened. And they're talking as though it's 1992 or even before, when they seem to have forgotten that we've moved far beyond that. There is no dialogue with those people. Now, there actually is on our point of view, because we look at even the communists, we say they're deluded. They're actually humans made in the image of God, and rationality is separate and apart from the brain cells themselves. That there is such a thing as logic, evidence, and you can persuade people. Truth exists independently of our minds. Mm-hmm. So we know even if there happens to be a conscientious Marxist who's willing to hear, usually they're not, but if they are willing to hear, they might even be persuaded to obey the gospel. It's that powerful, according to Romans 1:16. Many Marxists have converted to Christianity. Mm-hmm. Whitaker Chambers is a famous example of that. But I shouldn't have got off on all that, but it reminds me, we talk about there's no rationality to the flesh. Well, that makes all the sense in the world given the philosophical, naturalistic point of view of the Marxists, because they deny rationality. Many of them will frankly admit rationality is a theistic concept. It presupposes a theistic universe that there is rationality. I mean, that's pretty heavy stuff. We've got a real barrier to cross to get to a lot of those people now.
I mean, it sounds a lot like these certain religious organizations that say that you're either saved or you're not saved. You're predetermined.
Theological determinism.
It sounds a lot like the same thing. So might as well just kill off all the people that don't, you know, subscribe to our political, because they're going to hell anyway. I mean, you know, just make the world a better place.
I don't know all the history, but I think if you look at John Calvin, he was basically the dictator of Geneva, Switzerland.
Uh-huh.
He and his Protestant minions, and that's pretty well the way they ran things over there. I mean, you're one of the reprobates, so you don't have any rights anyway, and they executed people for the most simple offense according to the way we would view it.
It's kind of interesting, though, you know, not to be too far off subject, but you would think, well, how is it that, you know, Westerner can't think the same as an Easterner, or, you know, are we not all the same? I mean, isn't that what we strove so many years, especially back in the 60s? You know, nobody, you know, we're all the same, right? You know, we're all the same on the inside. And we're having all that undone because, well, no, you're white, so you think this way, and you have privilege, and if you're not white, it doesn't matter what, you know, other color, it's just white versus everybody else. But again, that goes back to the Marxism and the class struggle, the class division. You have to have strife. You have to create it, which, again, it gets down to, you know, I don't know what's going on these days. I feel like that, you know, it's not Democrat and Republican anymore. I mean, they're clearly all on the same page. I mean, they clearly, maybe it is a kind of a class struggle. Maybe it is kind of a, you know, they have their own party that they are throwing themselves, and we're not invited. You know, they have an exclusive club. And I don't know why that is. I don't know how, but, you know, Washington doesn't represent the people anymore. I mean, they represent themselves. They represent the pharmaceutical companies. They represent the military armaments companies. It's insane. It's insane that, you know, people are in need in this country, and, you know, if you're gonna spend money on stuff, if you're gonna throw money away to other countries, why wouldn't you spend it here first, and then, you know, if you have something left over, you know, it's kind of like the biblical principle that, you know, if you're going to provide charity, you provide it first to members of the congregation, to your brothers and sisters. I mean, that's your first priority. And then after that, I think it's okay to, of course, provide to other people. But if you have money and you have a brother that's in need versus, you know, some heathen, and you choose the heathen over your brother, I think that's a problem. And so I think we ought to carry that over into politics as well. But it's like, and I hate to, I don't want to get too political, but I saw something today. Again, it's an old tweet from Trump. This is years ago. This is way before he even thought about running for president. But he said, I hope we never do find life on another planet, because if we do, the United States government will immediately start sending them money. Because we do. I mean, we anyway, this. But in any case, I guess the point just being that, I guess ultimately the point is that we're just so glad that this life is ephemeral, that it's going to go away at some point. Because I could not imagine living forever on this planet, and the politics and the pettiness and the evil and the greed and the covetousness and all the other sins that are here, that exist because of sinful men. It is going to be a relief at some point to be released from all of this, but only if we're doing the things that we ought to be doing, and hopefully we're getting better at that by studying these wonderful examples, both good and bad.
Can I make a quick follow-up?
Oh, yeah, go right ahead.
When I said the materialists will argue that the idea of rationality and logic and, you know, communication, you know, one mind reaching another and persuasion, that sort of thing, that's only possible given a theistic frame of reference. They actually have the cart before the horse, have it backwards. They will say the only way you can presuppose that there is such thing as objective truth, is to have a universe created by God, an objective God. But then they will, of course, assume this universe is not. It's self-contained. Therefore, rationality doesn't exist in the old-fashioned sense we've always thought of. Everything's predetermined.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say what we have to do is go back and point out this fact. While you can make that argument that rationality is a premise that flows from God, you can also say we study each other, and throughout our history, human beings from every culture and every language group have already been communicating with each other. Now, given the naturalistic point of view, that shouldn't be possible, but it is happening. It is happening. In fact, what they've actually done, they've unturned. If you turn it upside down, they've unturned an argument that's in favor of theism,
Mm-hmm.
because the fact that we can communicate and there is rational thought it speaks loudly of the fact this universe cannot be confined to the material realm alone.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Just the very fact that there is such a thing as morality, I think, speaks to a higher power, certainly higher than just this, dialectical materialism, because, we see out in the animal kingdom, they don't know anything but to, kill or be killed. It is dog eat dog. I hate to keep bringing up this stupid stray cat example that I got, but we have a cat that we got from Loretta, one of the ones that didn't meet an unfortunate end, and of course we let it come in the house, and we give it space, and we feed it, and we pet it. The one that's outside, of course, it doesn't want to come in. We'd offer it, you want to, we can take care of the two cats, but it doesn't want any part of that, It wants to stay out on its own and hiss at us. But it's interesting because, when we were away, we bought this automatic cat feeder so I can, shoot food out. And, well, our cat, the one that we have been bringing up, it doesn't like to eat out of that tray. It likes to eat out of the one that we have inside. So he'll come in and he'll eat, and then he'll go outside. The other one, of course, that's the only one that well, when we're away, of course, our cat can't get in to get to the food, and so now there's just one bowl of food, right? And so, our cat will come up and he'll bat the other cat away. Get out of here. This is my food, And I just think, that's not the way that human beings, even marginally bad people, they're not going to do that. If somebody needs something, they're not going to come up and get away from that. That's mine. We tend to, just from even if it's just a very vague remembrance of morality from our youth, we tend to want to help people at some level. But cats like, nope, this is mine. Hit the road. Not going to share it with you. But again, they just don't have a sense of right and wrong. Right is whatever I want to do right at this moment. And whatever is wrong is the thing that I don't like that you're doing. You're eating out of my food bowl, so I'm going to correct that error. So just the fact that there is a morality, it clearly separates us from the animal kingdom. And where does that come? Did it evolve? If it evolved, did it jump every other species?
Yeah, you don't find it even in partial form at the lower levels. What they call lower.
Of course, people look at monkeys. Oh, look at monkeys and what they do. But that's not on the level of a human being and what we. Anyway, again, and people like to talk about animals, and sometimes we do ascribe to them certain emotions, but there is just nothing comparable. There's nothing even close to the level of a human being and the kind of morality and the knowing of right and wrong, and being able to act on that. Of course, now some people let their emotion, they just allow themselves to be ruled by their emotions, and I think that's what he's talking about here, or the author here is saying. There's nothing rational about the flesh. It feels, but it does not think. Severed from God, law, and restraints, it chooses sin's pleasures with reckless abandon. So if there's no God, there's no reason to not indulge the flesh in all of these ways. Why wouldn't you? This is the only shot that you have at life. I'm going to die, and after that, there's nothing, just the void, the emptiness, the unknowingness of death. So I'm going to live and enjoy the physical pleasures that I can while I can. I mean, that's the way that the atheist or agnostic thinks. Noah's contemporaries were dominated by the flesh. Genesis 6 and verse 3 says, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And pursued its ravenous passions until their minds were empty of a single righteous thought. A lifetime of fleshly lust cannot quench the fires of its interest. It does not pause to consider its ways. It is ever open to new ways of expression. It is oblivious to shame. Were the prophets, priests, and wise men of Judah ashamed?" Jeremiah 8 and 12. "Ashamed when they had committed abomination? Nay, they were not at all ashamed, neither could they blush." The flesh does not need the darkness to conceal its baseness. It considers it a, quote, pleasure to riot in the daytime. You ever seen a pride parade? I mean, they don't hide it. I mean, it's just right there downtown. All the politicians gather, right? 2 Peter 2:14. "It possesses eyes full of adultery, and that cannot cease from sin." Israel loved their gods of wood and stone because they allowed the flesh the freedom to pursue its uninhibited, desired ends.
Again, that reminds me of a statement I made the other day. I'll mention it again.
Mm-hmm.
Experts point out a pornographic culture is not just one where there's a lot of pornography viewing. That, of course, is part of it, a major part. But a pornographic culture is one in which the entire mindset has changed because of continual exposure to pornography.
Mm-hmm.
People think about sexual intimacy in those skewed ways as portrayed in the pornographic literature or movies. So I think it was Judge Bork that probably brought this up, slouching towards Gomorrah,
Mm-hmm.
where he mentioned a pornographic culture has crossed the Rubicon, as it were. It's another kind of culture,
Mm-hmm.
where it's, even the very ideas of sex are completely tainted in any context.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the other issue, and maybe this is part of it, is that you become inoculated. It's like a drug, You start out with marijuana, and you're smoking the marijuana, and that becomes a gateway drug, to harder things, and then you work your way up, and then, you're smoking crack rock with the president's son.
That's not just an analogy. I mean, that's exactly what it does.
Yeah, it does.
Pornography.
And pornography is like that. It's an addiction that, again, the more that you indulge in that, the more, I guess, harder types of pornography that you have to seek out in order to become excited. And it gets worse and worse and worse until I was reading about this guy that said his addiction had gotten so bad. He was watching it all the time, just different kinds, and it had gotten into kind of violent acts, and he'd gotten to the point where it kept getting worse, and he didn't wake up until he was in the back seat of this lady's car. He'd gotten in there and was hiding, and he was going to abduct her and forcibly rape her. And he realized, I think, I can't remember if he, I don't remember how far he got along with it, but he definitely, he says a turning point in his life where he kind of hit rock bottom with that. But can you imagine that? I mean, the way that society, they joke about it and they make light of it, and you watch it, and then that leads steadily down this course where you're, actually intent on violating some girl as a result of watching it. I mean, that's just, it's definitely a blight on society, and it's too easy to get. It's too easy to find that stuff. And the sad part is that I would ring the bell, but let me finish this point before I let them come out. There's been this big discussion about Twitter recently. There are some activists that are saying that the new ownership has been purging Twitter of the child pornography in particular. But it is on there not because specifically of just the small segment of child perverts, but because the mainstream pornographers, they have it as well, and they allow it. They kind of are in cahoots because it helps drive their business too. So and it's a gateway into. The people that are in that business, they don't have scruples anyway. They don't care who they violate, who is violated, and they just want to make the money. They want for their. It's like drug dealers, And so it's come to light that Twitter just allowed all of this stuff on. They didn't do very simple things to get rid of this element on Twitter because, well, why? I mean, you can draw your own conclusions, but it's kind of scary to look into this stuff and to see just how bad, how deep the roots of all of these evil things go in our society. Not just the depths, but how high up they go in levels of society and the people that indulge in this kind of stuff. It's pure evil, and yet again we're talking about the types of people that don't really believe in God. They believe in themselves. We're talking about these rich people, these billionaires, these politicians that have a lot of power, a lot of wealth, a lot of fame, and again, going back to this idea that they're not thanking God for it, they just think, hey, I must be just the most awesome person ever that I have all this power, and they think that their opinions count more than everybody else's, and that becomes it becomes poisonous to the soul.
Chris, I was thinking we need more Christian attorneys or legal minds. I know this is an oxymoron. We need more Christians, people who think in Christian ways, to grapple with some of the legal issues of our time. And one of them, where we need somebody to sit down, somebody like you, to sit down and do some special work, is in the area of answering our classical liberal point of view that's gone too far. The American classical liberal point of view, as interpreted by many of our courts over the last several decades, has been free speech is the primary goal, or at least it has been in the past. But with that comes the unsavory consequence. You've got to allow pornography and all that. As distasteful as it is, you could not be consistent if you forbade pornographic pictures and images, especially child pornography and so on. And at the same time, you allowed certain speech, like offensive political speeches, they would dub it. Mm-hmm. But I think we need people like, for example, in the book I mentioned a while ago by Bork, that was one of the critics' strong points against him. Bork, you could call Bork an elitist in a way, a very conservative elitist, but he was strongly in favor of censorship. Mm-hmm. Now, in our world today, you and I would probably jump back at that. It's almost like getting burned on a hot pan. We'd say, look what they've done in the name of censorship. But he meant censorship of things like that, of the horrible kiddie porn that even in the late 90s was available, and all these websites where these groomers would come together and learn how to abduct children and things like that, and how to get away with it. He was talking about those things. We need to have a conversation about how we can curtail the dissemination of that kind of information. Mm-hmm. Of course, that's what I'm saying. Somebody like you need to sit down and come up with a rational response to the courts. The courts seem to always get this wrong. That you either have untrammeled complete license and it includes pornography as well.
Mhm.
Or if you do in any way curtail pornography, then at the same time you've got to curtail offensive political speech, quote unquote.
Mhm.
So how would you deal with those issues? Because I think all of us instinctively recognize there is a category difference between pornography and even between, I wouldn't mind Democrats saying what they want to say on Twitter. They can, as long as it's within good taste,
Mhm.
they can put all their points of view out about the woman's right to choose and so on, and let us have the opportunity to counteract that, with our own evidence.
I think part of the problem is that pornography is. Who was it? What was the famous thing that the Supreme Court judge said? I know it when I see it. I think that's part of the issue. Is what are you talking about when you talk about pornography? Because I think it's dependent sometimes on the culture itself. There was a time where it was scandalous, to show your heel or to.
Yeah, but
I'm just saying it.
But we're in a case now where you've got kids that are being brought into these drag queens.
I understand.
Conventions and things like that.
I know, and I'm
we're
not
way beyond all of that.
Yeah, but again, even that, people are going to argue culturally. They're going to say, well, what's wrong with a man that's dressed up like a woman reading a book to a kid? That's where.
How do you answer that?
How do you answer that question?
How do you answer?
Well,
Succinct
personally,
answer to that.
I don't know that there's a succinct answer to it, but I think that one thing I was going to say was when you have social media companies that won't censor that or that try not to censor it, but on the other hand, they go out of their way to kick people off and to censor people that are misgendering people or that are saying hateful things. Again, it goes to who's making the definition, who is defining what hate speech is, who's defining what these things that are unacceptable images and videos and things. Who is making that determination? And I think that the sad reality is that when you go back to like the examples I give of the ankle or the neck or whatever, that was a cultural recognition. That was the culture of the day, which was very much informed by religion. We've now gotten to the point where nothing pretty much is out of bounds, but it's specifically because the culture is out of whack. And I think that's a problem that we have to address, spiritually. So, is there a spiritual fix for this problem, which we typically define in, a political way? It's kind of, I'm not sure what the best answer is other than to, convert people. But again, that's a yeoman's task. That's a very difficult lift at this point, as far down as we've sunk. But I don't know. I'll think about it. I'll have a perfect answer next time, maybe. I'll think about it. Saved by the bell. Let me hit the button.